Okay, great. Well, hi everyone. Welcome to our conversation number five. We're on now of our New Roots in Transnational American Studies series, a conversation series from the Tunisian Association for American Cultural Studies and the University of Birmingham's Center for the Study of North America. And we're here today, delighted to talk about life after cars with Sarah Goodyear and Doug Gordon with us here today. My name is John Munro. I teach history at the University of Birmingham, and I co-run the Center for Global American Studies. I should note again, this is a series, so just a heads up that next time, probably in September, our next session, we're going to be talking about the door stopper. Look at the size of this book. Alfred McCoy's Cold War on Five Continents: A Global History of Empire and Espionage. So another really exciting session we'll have coming up in a few months. But today we're here to talk about life after cars. Um, so let me maybe turn it over to you, my co-host Yosra Amraoui, to introduce yourself. Maybe say a little bit about tax if you want to.
Dear John, my name is Yosra Amraoui. I'm from Tunisia. I'm the vice president of the Tunisian Association for American Cultural Studies, which is an association tasked with the promotion of cultural studies about the United States. We work mainly in Tunisia, remotely with other institutions like the University of Birmingham, with the lovely Rona and John. And we do research conferences, seminars about cultural studies and mainly American studies. And today we're interested in hosting co-hosting this webinar with you, John, to talk about life after cars with the lovely Sarah and Gordon. Over to you to introduce
Okay,
the
great.
panelists.
Thank you, Yostra. Okay, so the way these sessions run is we've got together a lovely panel of readers who have had a chance to look at the book. They are each going to speak for, and I'll introduce them all in a moment. They will each speak for 7 to 10 minutes, reflections whatever reflections they have. They'll be sharing those with us. And then we'll turn it over to Doug and Sarah to respond in whatever way they would like to. And then we'll open it up to the audience for some questions, answers, comments, whatever is on people's minds. And I should mention, yes, unfortunately, the Rona Cran, who co-runs the center with me, is away today, so she's not with us today. But let me go through and just give the audience a sense of the fantastic folks we've got with us on the panel. I'll introduce all four of them right now in the order that they will speak when we get to that in a few minutes. So, Azbah Ansari is an architect aspiring to be an urban designer, a placemaking leader, and a mental health advocate dedicated to making change happen for the community's well-being. Her interest in human behaviors and psychology and love for her city of Lahore laid the foundations for her organization, Peacemakers Pakistani, with the vision of creating better places in Pakistan with the help of a placemaking approach and other creative solutions. And I'll add myself, check out Peacemakers Pakistani on Instagram. They've got some good content on there as well. After Azbah, we'll hear from Sadok Damak, who is an associate professor of cultural studies at the Faculty of Arts and Humanities of the University of Sfax in Tunisia. He holds a doctorate and a habilitation degree. His research focuses on cultural anthropology with a particular interest in ethnic, intercultural, and multidimensional identities in U.S. society. His latest publications include Interculturation and Ethnicity, Spanglish as the Emergence of a Third Identity, Interculturality as the Outcome of Religious Cultural Encounters in the Autobiography of Malcolm X, and The Nation of Islam, Cautious Return to Americanity in the 2010s. After Sadok, we'll hear from Reena Mahajan, who's an urban planner and architect. Through her independent consultancy, Studio Diversity, and that's spelt Divercity, and the civic tech platform Street Smart. Reena challenges car-centric urban design and works to make cities better, make them better support everyday life, climate resilience, and public well-being. Originally from Delhi, she's currently based in Paris. And I should also say about Reena, you have to check out Reena's YouTube channel. It's got Reena, if you could put it in the chat if that's possible, that would be fantastic because, and Azba, if you want to put your Instagram connection in the chat too, if you like, because Reena's got some really, really fantastic YouTube videos as well that I highly recommend people check out. And then our fourth, last but not least, of the four panelists, Gabriela García Portuondo, is a Cuban architect and urban planner focused on people-centered urban planning and climate resilience. She co-founded initiatives such as Our City, Our Space, and Placemaking Cuba to promote participatory urbanism in Cuba. She's also coordinated climate adaptation projects with the United Nations Environmental Program across Latin America and the Caribbean. She's currently based in Madrid, working with Paisaje Transversal. So those are our four panelists. I'll turn it back over to Yosra if you would like to introduce our two authors this evening.
Pleasure, dear John. So we have with us today Sarah and Doug. Sarah Goodyear is a journalist and author who has covered cities and transportation for publications such as Grist, City Lab, and Streets Blog. As to Doug, he's a TV producer and writer who is also a neighborhood safe streets advocate, better known online as Brooklyn Spoke. If you haven't followed their podcast, I really recommend you check in the wonderful podcast they issued in 2018. They live, with their families, Sarah and Doc, that is, in Brooklyn, and they came together to create this lovely podcast, the War on Cars podcast in 2018, out of a sense that no one at the time was covering the subject of cars and what they do to culture, to society, and to the planet in the way they felt it deserved. And I personally followed that podcast and I enjoyed listening to you guys. And please keep up the good work. To this wonderful book we're covering today, and I'm going to briefly be introducing the book because I would like, to leave the bigger part to the panelists to, interact with the authors. This book we have today builds a case around a simple but very provocative claim that the automobile, for long celebrated as a symbol of freedom and progress, has in reality become one of the most destructive forces in modern life. And we feel this bitterness throughout the book while we read it. Sarah Goodyear and Doug Gordon trace how car dependence was not an inevitable outcome, but a deliberate political and economic choice, in fact, one that reshaped the cities, marginalized those who cannot drive, fueled the climate crisis, and cost countless lives. But the book is not merely a critique, it's also a roadmap, it's also a path for hope. So we move from the critique to hope at the end because we realize that so many things in urban design to political organizing to individual action are actually within our hands. We'll listen now to the panelists one by one. I'll give it over to you, John, because I'm so eager to listen into how architects, academics, YouTubers, and urban designers will look at this book, each from their different perspective. Over to you.
Thanks, Yostra. Yeah, I really love, American studies is an academic field, but obviously everyone here is also like connected to that in different ways, especially with this very international group. So, okay, great. So we will now hear from each of our readers. Azbah, we'll start with you, and it's, as we said before, 7 to 10 minutes. If you get to 10 minutes, I'll wave, and that'll just, please wrap it up at that point. But Azbah.
Yes. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Azbah Ansari, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you. And okay, so when I joined the Car Free City Alliance, like it has been almost 2 years, more than 2 years. I was reluctant, first of all, because I'm someone who was like, do I really believe in a world without cars? So I have been questioning myself for a very long time, and I've come across a lot of great people, and Sir John is among those people. And when I was asked to read this book and review this book, I was like, maybe that's a sign. Maybe this is going to be an encouragement to step forward, one step forward. So I have been the person who was like, who used to say, I like bicycles, but so I think the authors will understand and the readers will understand what I mean in here. But I'm so happy and so thankful for the authors to being so kind in their critique. And in this wake up call, because that didn't made me feel, oh my God, okay, I'm being shown the mirror, the confrontation, because it was so kind and it was educational and it was giving me hope. Because, after reading the book, the impact was like I actually recalled all of my ideas and my dreams about the better places and about walking in my city and about bicycling as well. All those dreams that I've kept aside because of the practicality of them, I was waiting for a better time. I was trying to make things, trying to understand how things can be better. And the best thing about this book was it guided me on how we can take a one step forward, which was actually what I needed in this time of year. So in the process, I would say that I learned that patience is the key and the strategic process is the key. Uh, and since I've joined Corporate Cities Alliance, I have noticed like this book gave me the time to reflect upon my journey as well. So I have noticed that I have started taking step out of my car more occasionally than I have been doing it for a past like more than 10 plus years, because the things have been changing here a lot of in the worst sense. Safety, active transportation is lacking here, and crime rates, etc. And then the lifestyle, because we have been conditioned to go from one place to another, and the places are far away and things like that become the barriers in actually being explore any in enjoying any place in a leisureful way. Okay, so this made me realize once, like, we need the active transportation, we need safety, we need this thing, and it will happen over the years. Like a gradual shift will happen, but an overnight shift is not possible. So that reminder was amazing. And as an urbanist, as a placemaking leader, and as a architect, the main takeaway from this book for me was like we need to have a car plan or car reduction plan. It's not going to be car free for a very long time, definitely. So instead of expecting there will be no cars, that's not going to happen. So that was like I realized that it was not just my intuition, it was actually that's how it's had happened around the world. So that was okay. I was like, okay, this is hopeful point first. And then secondly, on a personal level, it was a sign that yes, one step forward, two step backward, one step forward, this is how it's going to happen, like it has happened for all of them. So but it always started with do it yourself. So this is something that was an encouragement for me, and I'm so grateful for the authors for this profound research and guidance in this book. And I promise to show this gratitude by educating people here and translating all of the lessons in the local context, inshallah. So I have actually jot down many points from this book that how I'm going to implement this over here, because the case studies, everything was so on point. Like I was like, okay, this is going to be a good helpful point for me to do it, because things that come from a journalist point of view, they are amazing. That kind of research is always on top. So yep, that point. And okay, so my favorite part of the book was the chapters Cars Ruin Childhood, because that's my pain point. Children are my driving force for the work I do. Whenever I'm like, I want to give up, look at my children and I'm like, no, I have to get back to work. And the second point is the are killing us, because when I started Peacemakers Pakistani, when I started advocating for public spaces, it was because of my health of my family and the children and overall society. So yes, these two chapters are my favorite of this, and I want to read some lines from this profound research and how they have expressed in this book. And I was like, wow, the spot on moment for me. Like I was impressed. So I would like to read, and it is from the Bruce Appleyard study. It says that, just a second, and oh, sorry for the okay. Kids aren't urban planners, but neither are most adults. And plenty of adults still get a lot of say in how people get around, often at the expense of anyone who doesn't use a car to travel. It's not unusual to go to a public meeting about a traffic calming project and hear someone say, I've lived in this neighborhood for past 50 years. I need my car to get to work, and I don't want any bike lanes. And I've heard a lot, and I believed in it too. It might be strange and even a little scary for children to speak up in front of a room full of angry adults who just want their parking. But it's fun to imagine a kid flipping this script and just hear this out. This was my wow moment. Like a kid saying, can we imagine a kid saying that I'm going to live in this neighborhood for the next 50 years? I need my bike to get to school, to park, the library, and even to work one day. And I want a whole lot of bike lanes. I was like, wow, this is so profound. Like, seriously, this is something that I wanted to say in my childhood, but I didn't know that I wanted this. And I want my children to say this to me. And I will be like, yes, do it. We are going to do it. So, later on this same page, the moment when Galette and her classmates, she is the daughter of Dog, so she took stand for the bike lanes, and man, I was so impressed. It's on page 63 of this book. I want to read it out loud because I want everyone to read it themselves. And like it was like, oh wow, savage. It's like education and life done right. So yeah, congratulations, author. You are doing great with your children as well. So I was, this kind of attitude and this kind of education I want our children to have, and to take stand for their future, because we are in the journey when we can make work with both of these things and the transition period. But the future generation is something who is going to get us out of the wrong habits that we are having. So I'm very much into educating them, and also to leave things step by step from ourselves to unlearn the habits that are not good for us. So yes, these were my amazing points that I wanted to share, and if I have time then I can share more. But yes, from this book, the thing that stood with me, the journey or the activism or the leadership of the leader that stayed with me, was John Barter. And I was like, oh my god, this is so good. Like his points and the way he educated people, and then he devised changes for the people in California. So that was amazing. So yes, and I believe that I can do something for my own city and my own people as well, inshallah. So thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you so much for giving this book to me and giving this opportunity to understand the dynamics and to believe in the leadership that I can take it forward so much. Thank you, Sir John, for this amazing opportunity. And yes, if there's more time, then I can try, or if it's enough, then I'm good to go for the next panelist.
Azbah, thank you so much. What a great way to start us off with such a brilliant set of comments. Sadok, let's
Thank
go
you.
over to you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. In my talk, I'll join Azbah in almost everything she said about the quality of this book as being educational, guiding, inspiring. So first of all, I'd like to thank you, organizers, for this webinar and the judicious choice of topic, which I guess will leave no one who takes part in this online event, no one indifferent to the car invasion of our everyday life, or leave us without food for thought to cogitate on the matter. To my mind, Life After Cars is a therapeutic book. It heals us from our hesitancy, our reluctance, and perhaps even our shame at the thought that we are enslaved by cars. Cars also determine our social status because we are programmed to believe that a car is a necessity and that we cannot enjoy life without a personal car. And it is considered a source of frustration when we cannot afford to possess one of our own. So, besides, this book, Life After Cars, raises real concerns about, first, how we are manipulated by car or the automobile advocates. Secondly, it raises questions about how car enthusiasts like car makers, oil companies, driving clubs, and so on, only seek victory in their conquest of our minds, along with our city spaces. And three, how to that end of conquest, the groups advocating for cars give decision makers and political authorities a blank check for a good conscience, as is clearly hinted to in the book. Good conscience to do nothing, actually, to do nothing for our comfort and safety. The book is also an invitation to recognize that today we are excessively reliant on cars and that we have to rethink our relationship with cars. So life after cars first brings to our attention the destructive aspect of the car culture. It shows how the advent of the automobile has reshaped our lifestyles and urban life. But at what cost? At a very high cost, actually, and with considerable large-scale damage. What is allegedly an epitome of independence paradoxically turns out to be a vehicle with no play on words whatsoever. Indeed, a vehicle of confinement that curbs our freedom of movement. It becomes a driver of isolation, egoism, and alienation as well. This book explains how car dependency affects health, urban planning, social justice, and the environment. We learn, and this is, I think, the gist of the book. It's the central theme, the core argument that cars are a major cause of death, like poison. The number of road accidents, we learn in this book, is increasing exponentially, causing thousands of deaths and serious injuries each year. We also learn that the widespread use of cars is a major source of air, noise, and microplastic pollution, causing climate change, wildlife extinction, and ocean contaminations. Another advantage of the book is written in a reader-friendly, fluid, and also humorous style that is sometimes ironic, I guess, to deconstruct, to mock the central argument, the far-fetched, actually, argument of the car defenders. Life After Cars is enjoyable to read also because it proposes insights on how to find solutions to all car-related issues, how to organize resistance, how to fight to win back a healthy environment, how to demand safer streets, how to plead the legitimate cause of pedestrians. In my concluding remarks about the book, I will simply add that today, car dependence is very strong. Cities without cars may seem unimaginable, even dystopian. But life after cars gives us hope. It reminds us that the challenge of reducing our dependence on cars can be a winnable battle. This also remains real if we rearrange our urban spaces and limit our addiction to individual cars. As the book subtitle goes, freeing ourselves from the tyranny of the automobile is indeed within reach. To do so, the book suggests that we make greater use of public and group transportation and invest in protected infrastructure for other mobility devices such as bike lanes. It also reminds us that the reconquest of asphalted spaces in our streets will give more room for social interaction, inclusion, and integration. So it's not unrealistic, therefore. It's not utopian. If we consider the successful transition achieved among car users in Paris, Madrid, Copenhagen, Oslo, Milano, Berlin, Gainesville, and other places with pedestrianized downtowns. The transition to more sustainable modes of transport is then possible. This is not unrealistic if we consider the hundreds of bike buses, for instance, which are active around the globe in imitation of the initial one in Belgium. Now, most studies show that cycling infrastructure increases safety and mobility. It is therefore high time to overcome our fears, reverse the tide, and confront the elected officials and those in general who oppose restrictive measures and the reduction of the traffic. Needless to add that the book leaves no question unanswered as far as I am concerned. And the ideas that the book defends resonate with me, as it should with everyone. I, for one, am among those who seek to reduce the harmful effects of cars. I still own a car, though. I'm still enslaved to it, I admit. But I have managed to reduce my car use by half over the last 10 years, despite the near absence of high-quality public transit in my country. I only drive around 3,000 miles a year, while annual per capita vehicle mileage in my country, Tunisia, is double that figure. My hope now is to gradually end my relationship with driving to achieve 0 miles in the coming years. That's all I have to add. With my best wishes for more luck and success. Thank you again for this thought-provoking book and for listening.
Wow. Thank you, Sadok. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Reena, let's go over to you.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Yosra, for having me. Can you hear me well? Okay, excellent. So I'm really happy to be here. I love the podcast. I love the book. A real pleasure to be having this discussion. Just some context perhaps on me. So I have been an urban planner for 20 years now, with good intentions and with this belief that I was part of the solution. You know, often people say, well, I'm in climate now. And I say, yeah, but I've been doing that for a long time. You know, I've been working on sustainable urban design. And I have been, I've been talking about shared streets for a long time and compact housing and all of that. But I admit that it was only 5 years ago when I became a parent that I really understood what was the problem with our cities. I am from Delhi. I kind of took it for granted that cities are just like that. I came to Paris. I thought, oh, it's like a village. It's like really lovely, even before the transformation, by the way. And then I went to Montevideo, where I was living for a few years when I had my child, and I that's where I really felt it. So it doesn't mean that Uruguay was like the worst, most car-centric city. It's just that my experience made me realize something. I would probably have realized it anywhere anyway. This profound realization that I had was that our own urban planning profession is complicit in maintaining this status quo of car dependency, of car supremacy, because I feel we haven't done enough to challenge it. And the reason we haven't done enough to challenge it is because we're all part of the same society, and the car bias and this, what you call motonormativity, it affects urban planners as well and policymakers as well. And so now having realized that, I put everything into communication. I want to work to, this is what I do now. I try and reveal car bias and make visible all the things that have been normalized. And all the things that need to happen today that Life After Cars talks about. We need more political will, we need more citizen action, organized action. But for all of that to happen, we need to have this kind of cultural permission for this change. And this cultural permission is what today I am just dedicated into trying to build. So you can imagine that, well, when this book came out, it was obviously very much on my list. So if I were to talk about the book, I think I would like to start with the title, Life After Cars. So the title, it doesn't say fewer cars. It says life after cars. So it is very much a bold statement. It's a provocation. And I feel that this book earns this title as you read it. It starts by showing that car dominance was not inevitable. It was built through policy, through propaganda, through money, design, and culture. And it was built, and it can be changed. I think that's the implication in the first chapter. And then the second chapter really like builds the case one after the other, to really like convince you. And I mean, I'm convinced, but it was nice to see and to read all of that in a very straightforward way, like cars ruin everything, and one by one by one. And so by the end of it, they end with, in a positive note with real examples of change. And in the end, from a provocation, it does start to feel like a logical conclusion as something inevitable. And so I think that's why the title kind of it earns its place at the end as something inevitable. And just so I think it did something very clever there. And so just like the war on cars kind of turns this accusation back on itself, because this irony that you're asking for safe streets and you're told, oh, you're waging a war on cars. So Life After Cars does something equally clever. It kind of challenges this belief that, well, this is how things are, this is how cities are, we just have to live with it, live with the noise, live with this. And so it kind of, at the end of it, it kind of makes you feel that no, I think the tide is changing, and that life after cars is something that might just be inevitable. So yeah, I think I really enjoyed kind of thinking about the title a lot throughout the book. I also don't read it as, this is my interpretation, and I would love to know from Doug and Sarah what they think about this interpretation of mine, that I do not read it as a literal life after cars or without cars. I see it, as the cover also shows, I see it as life after car supremacy. So life after the idea that cars get to decide, our movement, our safety, our health, our childhood, our public life. The cover shows, these the traffic lights and the cars being reclaimed by by vegetation. And so when I see this, I see it like a symbol, and I see it like it's not the end of cars. It's the end of car dominance as a logic that organizes everything about the city. And so it's just hopeful in that sense that, another form of life can return, and car culture is something that, well, we might just have a life after car culture as we know it. And some of the things that I liked about the book, that it was accessible, no jargon, it didn't try to moralize, it just said things as they are. The first line of the book, cars ruin everything. It's pretty straightforward. It was witty. There were some very nice lines. I thought it was nice the way they said, if a bike lane was a mare, then it would win, or they would win in an incredible landslide. I like that because it just kind of makes this case and tells political leaders that, look, if you make this your political agenda, it might just not be political suicide. And so I liked all of these things about the book. I guess I would like to say, as I end my review of the book, that it does these two things at the end. It helps people who already feel that, they already feel what cars are doing to them. It kind of helps them articulate what the problems are, why this is happening. It lights a little fire in people, perhaps. I had to imagine what it would be like for a person who had never thought about these topics, because I am obsessed by this topic. So I had to put myself in the shoes of someone who's not obsessed by this topic and they're trying to read this like for the first time. So I think the book succeeds in lighting this little fire that says, oh, this is very unjust and I need to do something about it, or give people some sort of like hope or desire. So I think, yeah, really well done for that. One question I have to Doug, for Doug and Sarah, is that, well, I guess the book speaks to a North American audience. That's natural, and it's not a critique. That's just how it is. That's where you're from. But what's happening right now is not that this mistake has happened everywhere in the world. In many parts of the world, believe it or not, the mistakes have, as horrible as they are, in places like Delhi, Mumbai, it's just the beginning. And people are actively and enthusiastically, with political support and institutional support, destroying these cities even more, building flyovers. And somehow in the 21st century, where ideas should take seconds to travel, there's this whole political class that still believes that cars are more modern, progress, and all of that. The worst thing is that they know. I asked somebody in the Ministry of Transport in India, why are you still doing this? And they said, well, it's our time to make mistakes. It's demand and supply. We have to do this. We'll repair it later. So I'm just curious to know from Doug and Sarah, how would you feel like your arguments travel to these places, like outside the US context? Have you had any feedback? What would you say to people who are like hell bent on taking this, dystopian path? So I would like to end with this question.
Thank you, Reena. What a great question too. And of course, we'll wait to hear the answer. But first, let's hear from Gabriela.
Hi, good afternoon. Well, first, I would like to thank Doug and Sarah for such an eye-opening book, and you, John and Yosra, for the invitation and for the book, which I loved reading the physical print. I would like to reflect on what the book means for my country, Cuba, and other countries that are in a period of rethinking their future, some kind of transition periods. One reason I found this book particularly timely for my country is that it's a moment where a lot of Cubans are imagining possible futures for the country. And sometimes in these conversations, or most of the times, people often sees the United States as an implicit reference point for development, economic growth, and opportunity. And it's where I find this book, Life After Cars, because it asks us to look beyond the image of car as prosperity. This automobile-centered city has another consequences that the United States has seen, but sometimes hidden, and the books put it in a very clear way based on data, which I enjoyed a lot, reading the history of this car dominance through data. So the book argues how automobile is not merely a transportation technology. It shapes political priorities, social relations, cultural values, nature. So they don't simply transport us, it shapes the world around us. Firstly, the book shows, and I really enjoyed, how car dominance was not inevitable. And for me, that was key, how discussions and intervention of these motor-dome campaigns, the walking, the rejection of bike leash, as the author shows, the transformation of streets from public spaces to traffic infrastructures, this shifting point that clearly shows the book. It's measured at the end by political power and culture in certain time. So it made me ask one key question for my country. So if car dependency was created through political choices, it can also be avoided through political choices. So it's a moment of reflections for the countries that still haven't undergo this path. In this sense, one chapters that I really enjoyed were these cars ruin everything, and I must say that all these chapters were really enjoyable for me. But this the chapter on cars, on how cars are unjust, was really relevant for me because at first glance, Q appears to challenge some of the assumptions behind the book, like car ownership remains relatively low, many streets still super walking, kids street play on the streets. There's a strong public life around us, but yet, while reading the book, I've seen some of the inequalities that are emerging in the countries and some that I have seen in the past few years. So, how automobile has become associated with freedom, success, and status, which is something that you can read through the book, and the relationship between cars and status has been particularly visible in Cuba in the past few years, since a small economic opening that happened in 2016. And on the other hand, we have a bike culture that emerged in the 90s as a response to an economic crisis. And what seemed to be an amazing mobility experiment, and on my point of view, a very successful one, is related with economic scarcity for the generation, for example, of my parents. I mean, they see the bicycle as something that appeared for an economic period, of a difficult period. So the bicycle is, to say it in simple words, for poor people. And on the other side, we have these new cars, the famous SUVs that the book so called for, that are emerging, not associated with, as a symbol of status, which doesn't mean that they introduce new status. It's only that it shows the difference between different classes, and that came perfectly clear for me when a friend visited Cuba 3 years ago, and he told me that the Cuba that he had seen before, maybe the social inequalities were less visible, but right now you can see the cars on the road and the people waiting in the stops, long queues. So for him, the cars was what showed him the social inequalities that the country was living. And that's, for me, that's why I love this chapter, Cars Aren't Just, because automobile often functions as a mechanism through which social life inequalities are reinforced and displaced. So in Cuba, what it eventually follows this pathway, following the United States urban, I won't say urban, transit, transport design or car-centered design way of shaping the cities as maker of prosperity. We could lead to this congestion, road danger, growing transport costs, loss of public space, and environmental degradation. But for me, the key loss will be the gradual erosion of everyday social life that we'll still have. And that's something that the book clearly reflects. And it's a warning point for me. I don't think the question in any case is whether economic development should occur, is what kind of development do we want? And it made me ask me, should prosperity be measured by the number of private vehicles, or if we have more accessible, inclusive, safety, quality of life within the cities? I have seen in my work in placemaking that small actions could have a very wider impact, especially in contexts where economic scarcity often doesn't allow for these big infrastructure investments. And the book clearly showed us some examples on both sides, like big investments, but also how political will and tactical urbanism can foster human interaction and be a starting point for pedestrianization, citizen-led interventions. And that's something I really enjoyed in the last chapter of the book, this pathway of 8 points that they gave us. I mean, for me, this book wasn't ultimately about cars. It was about thinking what kind of society I want for my country. It made me reconsider whether mobility should be treated as an end itself or a means to support healthier, fairer, and more connected communities. I don't think, and I don't feel during reading the book that the cars are inherently bad. Rather, how carefully we should be about confusing automobility with progress, and how we have to shift from this car-centered culture to car as a mean for long-distance transportation for different things, but as a mean also that we have to avoid that it will reshape our social life. This book, I mean, for me, it reflects some mistakes during the history of the car-centered mobility in the United States that we should not repeat, but ultimately it showed me that the opposite of car dependency is not cycling or walking. The opposite for me is that city where people can belong. And to avoid that, there should be a mindset shift in all of us urban planners and politicals around this decision making. So I would like to thank Doug and Sarah because for me and for I think for this decision in the short term that we have to make in Cuba will have a very strong impact, the book. So thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gabriela. Wow. Okay. So now the unenviable task for Sarah and Doug is to try to reply to this series of comments and insights. However, the two of you want to handle it, if you want to speak, I'll leave it to you.
We're podcasters used to sharing microphones, so we'll figure this out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know where to start. I mean, this is the most wonderful webinar we've done so far. Thank you for, I mean, it's not just the compliments. Those are very nice to receive, of course, but you clearly have all really read the book. And it's just so nice that it, landed with you all in the ways that it did. Gabriela, one of the last things you just said was, which I'm going to steal and I'll try to credit you when I use it in the future. But when you said the opposite of car dependency is not cycling or walking, but a city where everyone can belong.
Yeah,
that
I
landed
also,
so well with
I mean,
that's it. That's it in a nutshell.
like
It's
that
like
in a nutshell,
I'm not
yeah.
telling people to get out of their cars and onto a bike or do whatever you need, whatever suits the job that you have to do at the moment. But that cuts to the core of, I think, what Life After Cars and the War on Cars is about. So thank you for that. Yeah, I'm just going to try to go
I mean,
backwards.
should I
Go
just,
ahead.
we can
Yeah,
go
jump
back and
in.
forth. Yeah. So again, like this is, I have to echo Doug, this is some of the most dynamic and interesting and gratifying feedback that we've gotten. And it's especially so
Yeah.
because we're talking to people from such different parts of the world, such disparate parts of the world. I've not been to any of these places that we've mentioned, except for I've been to Delhi, and I've been to Madrid many times, which is where Gabriela is sitting now. But this to me is the dream that people in countries where some of these decisions are still to be made, where there still exists, as Gabriela was talking about, as I'm sure one finds in Tunisia as well, this vibrant culture on the street that is the legacy of millennia of human development. and of urban spaces that have been molded by human beings and human bodies and human sensibilities. And if we can figure out how to not lose those things, I sometimes cite the history of cell phones in African nations because many, many years ago, before anyone in the United States was doing banking or any kind of thing via cell phone, people in African countries were, because they had sort of leapfrogged over a whole part where, there were, different ways of accessing banking, for instance. And then it went straight to phones, and then the US took a while to adapt that. And so, I think of the ways that actually many nations in the global South and can maybe avoid some of these disastrous outcomes that we've had here. And also because so many of these cultures and places that we're talking about are places where indigenous culture still exists, which of course in North America is something that was obliterated in a genocidal fashion early on. So, I think that's all really so important and resonant for me. I especially also I loved what Reena said, that, when you said you don't read it as a literal life after cars, but life after cars get to decide what the world looks like. And I love actually the way you said cars get to decide, because that sometimes is how it feels, right? We struggle against saying, oh, the person was hit by a car, and try to say the person was hit by a driver instead, to put that human agency in. But sometimes I think it's appropriate to say, why are cars deciding? Because it does feel like actually it is the cars who are deciding, that they somehow have agency, and wait until they're robot cars and then they'll really be deciding for us. So before we get to a world that's completely owned by robot cars, this is, I think, the cutting edge of transformational change for our planet is going to be precisely in the nations and cultures that are represented here. And if North America can be at all useful as sort of something to look at and say, here's what we don't want to do, or here's what we can take from this that's positive. Here are the lessons that have been learned. When you give over an entire continent to cars, what happens? I think that can be very helpful. So that hearing that perspective has been really amazing for me. And I'll give it back to you, Doug.
Yeah, I think, Reena, you also asked, like, how do these arguments travel outside the US, and what to say to people who might want to repeat these mistakes. I think, part of it right now, look at oil prices, thanks to, unfortunately, what our country is doing. I don't foresee a future where oil prices are going to be cheaper than they were before the start of this war. And even in our country, where even the lowest income people have sometimes a higher quality of life than the poorest of the poor in much of the rest of the world, the last thing we would want to do is lock in car dependency for the people who can least afford it. So I think that's something to point to. Oil prices affect everyone. Electric vehicles are still going to be very expensive for most people to own and maintain, even with cheaper imports now from China, BYD, things like that. So I think that's something to say. And just the sort of, I think as Sarah was saying, like the preservation of culture. We have not just our indigenous culture, but we wiped out Black neighborhoods, Jewish neighborhoods, Latino neighborhoods. We wiped out all sorts of things that make our cities special. Why do people love coming to New York? It's because for the most part, it retained its built form from before World War II, whereas most American cities were bulldozed to make way for highways in the post-war period. So I think when you're pointing to the United States, or people are pointing to our economic development, you really should be pointing to, yes, but look at how much, sure, there's economic development in Atlanta and Los Angeles and Houston, but look at how much time those people spend in cars. I think that's what we have to be pointing at.
I also wanted to talk quickly about the issue of status and cars as a marker of status, which came up in a couple of ways. That is also a problem here in the United States. It's certainly, especially for disadvantaged communities, it is not only a marker of status, but it is actually really a way to achieve status. It's a way to get education, it's a way to get to education, it's a way to get to employment that is not accessible for people. So, when I think of that, I think of, how do we create a higher status profile for our public goods, right? And that is something that also has to go on elected officials. This is part of their responsibility to say, we are providing excellence for our citizens and our residents through the provision of public goods. And those public goods are going to be something that people can be proud to use, can be happy to use, and that can give them the dignity and opportunity that they need. And I often say, walkable neighborhoods in the United States of America are quite often economically inaccessible to most people. They've become a luxury good, and walkable human scale neighborhoods should not be a luxury good here in the United States or anywhere else in the world. That should be a human right, that if people want to live in such a neighborhood, that should be accessible to people of every income range. And I do think it's on our governments to provide public space, public transportation, public facilities that confer dignity upon their citizens, because that is how we say, no, it's not a rat race where everybody has to grab their own car and only get, and that's how you show that you're a worthy human being. We have to say that everybody in the society is worthy. And I also want to speak to what Sadok said that really moved me is, the idea that we really consciously tried to not bring shame into this. This is not about shaming people for their individual choices. We are all caught in this system. We all have been car dependent. And when I've been car dependent at different times in my life, this is nothing that individual people should feel bad about using a car. We understand that it's a systemic change that needs to happen, but also you talked about healing. And I really think, to me, healing and repair are the main things that we are charged with right now in this world. The people of all generations who are living right now, this is what we should be thinking about. And to me, this is an important vector for healing our societies and our cities, is to really get ourselves out of that mononormativity mindset and try to repair the fabric of the places that we live and the fabric of the relations among us in public space.
And Sadaka, you also said it was a therapeutic book. I mean, that was part of our goal. This crowd, the people on this webinar, are approaching this subject from a very high level already. You are not the introductory, university class. You are the graduate students and beyond. And so it's very gratifying to hear that you felt it that way. That sort of was one of the goals, that we had to speak to the people who knew everything about the subject and the people who know very little or nothing about the subject, and speak to them both with the respect that they deserve. So that's very gratifying to hear. And Azbah, I just want to tell you, I'm going to tell my daughter that her story of the bike corral has made it around the world. She is now in high school, and she is fighting for another bike corral at her new school, at her high school. So she'll be very happy to hear that story stuck out to you. So I don't know. Thank you. We're happy to take more questions.
Yeah, I think that Reena actually did have a question that you were sort of talking about. How do we get people in nations like India out of the mindset where it's our turn to make these mistakes, and now we get to make them. I mean, you hear this with climate all the time, right? Is that, well, the quote unquote developed world had all this time where they got to develop without having to worry about carbon emissions. And now it's India's turn, and now it's China's turn to get to burn as much carbon as they want. I think that my answer to that is that I believe that really positive development that lifts everybody up can happen without making those mistakes. We don't need to make the same mistakes, and we can instead, gain some wisdom and I think that if what Anne Hidalgo in Paris, when I was lucky enough to speak with her last year, one of the things that she said she used as a guiding principle in her efforts to make Paris a better place was precisely she was trying to improve the quality of life for the people who lived in Paris. And that was it was not sort of an ideological thing like I'm against cars or I'm against X, Y, or Z. It was I want to make the quality of life better for the people who live here. And, making the air cleaner, which obviously is a huge issue around the globe. This is one way that transportation can be really immediately linked in many people's minds to they see that on the street. They know that when there's these air quality alerts in Delhi or cities like Delhi, they know that a lot of that is coming from transport. And so I think that trying to get elected officials and planners to be looking at issues like air pollution and saying we have people who are dropping dead in the street from air pollution, right? So how do we provide a better life for them, and what makes a really good life? And also the emphasis on family and social ties that I think in the United States, because of the way the United States was settled, those have always been very weak here. And we don't have good social infrastructure here, familial social infrastructure. And, maybe sort of saying like, this is this great treasure that many of the societies that we're talking about have, is this really strong familial structure and neighborhood structure that has sustained these cultures for so many thousands of years. So to see that as a national treasure, a societal treasure that shouldn't be smashed up, I think is another way maybe of talking about it. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
I also think this probably also addresses a question Shivaji has in the chat, but webinars like this, getting elected officials from different countries to visit other places, nothing beats seeing, Utrecht in the Netherlands or the Transmillennium in Bogota. I mean, drop a elected official from India in suburban Houston and then take them to suburban Utrecht and ask them which they would rather see 50 years into their country's future. I think that travel is nothing beats direct experience. I think so many of us who do this work were inspired by being uprooted from where we live and moving somewhere else, or just a leisurely vacation to another place and experiencing something else, or a work trip that caused us to see something different. So I think firsthand experience and trying to do that bridge building across advocates and elected officials where possible, nothing beats. I mean, Sarah and I have been to now 32 cities across North America, and it has given us such a wildly new perspective, not only on our own country, but also where we live and have lived for so long here in New York. It's made us appreciate the things we're doing right and see the things that we could be doing better.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Sarah. What brilliant responses. So I'm just jumping in here. I'm going to pass it over to Yosra now to moderate. I see we've had Shivaji's question, and maybe that won't be the first one from him. We've got some other hands. And I just wanted to say, as I pass it over to Yosra, that obviously there's going to be questions and comments from our audience, but for our panelists, who obviously I know we have not exhausted the brilliant insights that all of you have. That if the questions are for Sarah and Doug, the other panelists, please, stay in the conversation and feel free to jump in as you will as well. But Yosra, let me turn it over to you now.
John, and thank you. Big, big thanks to all the panelists and all the readers who did this excellent overview of the book and referred to the main axes that are worth discussing today, each from his or her own perspective. I see many hands, but I recall having read Mr. Shiva's question in the chat box, but I'm going to give him the floor if you would like to ask it live. Otherwise, I'm going to read it to Mr. Shiva. Would you like to just unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, delighted to. I think we got part of an answer from Doug earlier, but I'm really interested to hear more, either from Sarah and Doug or from other panelists, about ways in which we might build links between Better Streets or similar campaigns worldwide. And apologies for coming late to this. So in case people don't know, like John, I'm part of a group in Birmingham called Better Streets for Birmingham. And I noticed that Kevin, another member of the group, has dropped the link to that group in the chat. And I know that we'd love to make contact with anyone who might want to create links to push forward the work we do in our various locations. One final comment, just to say, part of the reason for that is something that Doug and the team were kind enough to respond to in a question on the War on Cars podcast, which was just the burden people face when they have to try and push back against cars and cars culture over years. And there's something about keeping energy levels up. This sort of brilliant panel is really, really helpful. I'd love to know what other ideas there might be. Thank you.
So I will
like
say,
me to give you the floor, and then,
I'm sorry.
or would you like to take a round of questions and then answer? What works best for you?
I think for
one-on-one,
me,
it would be
it's
good.
better to just answer immediately if
Go
that's
ahead, then.
fine.
Sure.
As Doug was sort of alluding to, one of the greatest things about doing what we've done on this tour has been to be in spaces where we're convening people, right? And what we've heard everywhere is, oh my God, getting together in this room with all these people really got me going. Like that has, now I'm ready to go back. I'm recharged. Because it is very dispiriting work sometimes. It can be very difficult. And so I think, we're happiest like after we've done our show or our presentation, and then we see everybody talking to each other. And that's really what it is. It's not about us. It's about creating a space for this to happen. And I'm so happy that this space exists. So I would say that really convening people and finding ways, and one of the cool ways that we noticed was in Austin, Texas, which of course, Texas being one of the most auto-centric states, and Austin being kind of the liberal city in Texas, where maybe has more progressive ideas than the rest of the state. Austin, Texas, some young urbanists there have started a book club, Urban Austin Reads, and every month they pick a book and they have, I think, weekly discussions, right, Doug? Where they'll, now we're reading chapter 1 to 4, now we're reading chapter 5 to 7 or whatever, and they meet every week to discuss. And they have looked at books. They read our book, which was wonderful, and we got to speak directly to the group. They've read books about how to combat the rise of fascism. They've read books about the ways that zoning, distorts cities, and, all these incredible books, and they serve as a way of convening people. And I think convening people is the thing to do, and books can be a great way to do that. And I hope to see chapters of that Urban Austin Reads. I would love to see that idea spread, because it gives people a focus and it provides content that's not necessarily contentious content about this is the bike lane in Austin where we have to have that argument again. Instead, it's a way of feeding ourselves and strengthening ourselves with information and arguments so that we go back into the fight more sustained. So that's just one small example.
Mr. Doc, do you have anything to comment on
Yeah,
that,
I would
or
say, as someone who's been an advocate for a long time, this can be very demoralizing work, and you are often pushing back against very bad faith attacks, very powerful organized attacks from elected officials in the press. And so, as Sarah said, I think doing stuff in real life, getting offline, meeting more, I think more people tend to agree than disagree. It's really the folks like British media, for example, tabloid culture in the US that likes to stoke up fears about bikes and what they're going to do to people and changing cities. I also think it's okay to take a break, from whatever type of advocacy you're doing. We all need to refill our cups and recharge our batteries as much as we can. And, there's more to Sarah and to me than to just the war on cars. We have hobbies and friends and family. And I think just recharging and connecting with people in real life and reading a book that's not about this subject and watching a silly movie or going on vacation or whatever it is you can do. And then you come back recharged, ready to fight. Again, there's no way I could have sustained this for 15 or 16 years, at least, that I've been doing it. And the other thing I would say is just I try to be very humble. I love going into these spaces to just meet all of these people who are doing all these cool things. And like the Car Free Alliance sounds like an incredible organization representing people from all over the world. So knowing that there are other people doing this and I can take a back seat for a little bit and then come back to it, that's always good.
Thank you. We're going to move to North Africa. I see many hands from our region, and I think this is going to introduce a perspective that is maybe new to you. I am happy to give the floor to Dr. Oussama Ousmani to ask his question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Yosra. Thank you, everyone, for this amazing panel. So I have three questions, but before I get into that, I appreciated the book, the counter history that you provided. This was very intriguing. It was very interesting. It's not something that I thought I would ever think about, you see. And so the book introduced me to this particular issue. Now I have three questions, two about the political economy of the industry and one about the global south. The first one has to do with the idea that the book does not really sufficiently engage with the workers that depend on the industry to survive. And it builds a powerful moral case against the industry itself. But I'm not sure it seriously asks the question of who pays the price of dismantling this entire industry. Some of the statistics that I just had looked up today is that globally, that 10 million people who are directly working in the industry and 74 million who depend on it directly or indirectly. And so the book, to me, it asked me to imagine a life after cars, but it did not tell me what happens to the millions of people whose entire economic dignity and livelihoods depend on the industry. And so I'm very interested to know what you think about that. What would happen to these people in a life after cars? And similarly, my second issue has to do with gentrification and the idea that, creating neighborhoods that are walkable, that have bike lanes, that are beautiful, that are rich in public transportation, necessarily results almost always in increasing the expense of life in those neighborhoods. They become very expensive, property becomes very expensive, and this usually also results in the displacement of individuals who used to be living there. I had an experience in Washington, D.C. I lived in a neighborhood that was being gentrified, and the upper side of the neighborhood was beautiful, bikeable, had beautiful walking lanes. It was entirely upper middle class white people, despite the fact that the neighborhood is historically a black neighborhood. The other part of the neighborhood was not gentrified yet, and people still could afford to live there, at least from the communities that your book mentions are victims of cost, brown communities, black communities. And so I'm wondering, how can we, or how can you approach the idea of having a life after cars, whereby you have these neighborhoods that are walkable, that are bikeable, that are beautiful, that have rich public transportation, but that are also unaffordable. And so you're going to basically solve a problem and create another one. And so how can we ensure that this displacement does not occur? And my final question has to do with the global south. And it seems to me that the book is somewhat Western centered. It talks about the United States, talks about Northern Europe, but in cities like Tunis, capital of Tunisia, where I live, or Cairo in Egypt, owning a car is actually a form of liberty, not oppression, because the public transportation system is unreliable, it is dangerous, it is deeply gendered. You'd be surprised by the statistics of sexual harassment and how often it occurs on public transportation. And so for some individuals, for most individuals in these countries, owning a car is a form of liberation. And you might rightfully so argue that governments and cities should invest more in a better public transportation system. But then I would say, where are we going to get the money for that from? There are no financial resources to do that. And so how can we ensure that this vision of a life after cars includes countries in the global south that are financially struggling, and not just become a manifesto for wealthier countries that can afford to have this kind of vision? Thank you so much.
Yeah, those are all great questions. Yeah, I think I'll start with industry, you know, the question of who pays the price of dismantling this system. You know, yes, specifically in the United States, the automobile industry is a major factor in our economy. The 2008 bailouts of the auto industry were done because the entire economy would have collapsed had the automakers gone away. I think we talk a lot on the show about a just transition, that many of the union jobs, the good paying jobs that are building automobiles could be transitioned to building transit, to building, you know, high-speed rail, to building the kinds of infrastructure we need for a climate-friendly, just future, building green energy. That's, you know, part of the, I have my issues with it, but part of the abundance movement, that's part of their argument. I'm thinking of a small initiative that was just spun up in Detroit, where they're trying to bring e-bike manufacturing to the city. They have all kinds of skilled mechanics, and it can scale rather easily given the skills of the workers there. So I think, you know, we don't want to ignore, like we say in the book that the automobile industry in the United States built the middle class, and you wouldn't want to just pull the rug out from under that. And that's true around the world as well in lots of places. I think on the issue of gentrification, Sarah, feel free to jump in, but like, I think those are all valid concerns. I think things that we need to be doing in neighborhoods, just a stone's throw from where I live is the Gowanus neighborhood in Brooklyn, which former industrial, it is a very dirty, polluted site that's being cleaned up, but they rezoned it to allow for, I think, a grand total of 8,000 new units of housing. But included in that was free industrial space, maker space, affordable housing, very low parking requirements to keep the cost of housing low. I think there's other things that we could be doing. Community land trusts are one, you know, where instead of developers owning parcels of land, the people who live on those, you know, in those buildings own it and have say over how they're sold, who they are sold to, rent control, of course, and then low and no interest loans. You know, let's say a neighborhood is on the verge of being upzoned or changing, going into those places and saying, okay, you do not currently own your place. We see the value of it is going to go way up. Let's get you a low or no interest loan so you can buy your place outright right now, before the real estate speculators come in, before the gentrifiers come in and are able to bid up the value of those places. So I think, you know, yes, we have to treat all of those things sensitively. I think the counter argument to all of that is just we need to build a lot more. Like if the things if things are being priced at a high price, nice walkable neighborhood, sort of like Sarah said, that's a sign that there is demand. And the faster and more we build of those things, the lower the prices hopefully will stay. And then, yeah, look, I think the issue of cars as a form of liberty and safety, that's an issue here in the United States. Outside of a small handful of places, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, your car is your ticket to freedom. And gendered violence on transit is a big issue here as well. I can't speak to the global South, but that's a big issue that we're up against.
I mean, I will say that when I was in Delhi, I did ride the metro and I rode on a women-only car and, had that experience. I'm well aware of gendered violence on transportation globally, and I've experienced it myself here in the United States, in Berkeley, California, on BART. And, so that is certainly important. And again, car infrastructure isn't free for governments to build. Car infrastructure is incredibly expensive to maintain. And once you build your way into these situations, what we have, for instance, with sprawl development in the United States, is that we've built a lot of infrastructure that we can't maintain, and it's falling apart. And, you see it I was just in the state of Maine, which is a very poor state here. And it's almost entirely white. It's like 98% white. So you can see that these issues are not always breaking down on racial lines in the United States. It's a very disinvested state, and the roads are in terrible, terrible condition, and they just can't afford to maintain them. So, building infrastructure for cars is very, very costly. And also the healthcare costs that come along with it. One of the studies we cite in the book is from Japan, and it's in a semi-rural area there where a transit stop was added to a line. And the healthcare costs for the people in that community went down, I think, by an average of $600 a year after that transit stop was added, creating a natural experiment where you could see that having access to transit actually makes the community healthier, and that brings down costs. As far as gentrification goes, I really do feel strongly that everybody deserves to live, as I said earlier, in these communities. Saying that you're not going to build a bike lane somewhere is not going to. I've been I'm a New Yorker, and I've been living the story of gentrification my whole life, and seen what it's done to my city. And I'll tell you that it happens in neighborhoods that don't have bike lanes. I'll tell you that that you could have 0 bike lanes in New York, as there were when I was growing up, and it was happening then. So I think that it is easy to see bike lanes as a proxy for these things, but we need to, in my city, many of the people who need safe bike infrastructure are working cyclists who are working with their bicycles, and they are in tremendous danger a lot of the time. And those are people who live in neighborhoods like Corona and Queens, which is a very low income neighborhood. And that has been getting bicycle infrastructure slowly but surely over the years. And that is providing safe passage for those people who are at the bottom rung of entrepreneurship here in the United States. So I think that it's easy to see, and I've covered this as a journalist many times, how people are frightened by bike lanes coming into the neighborhood. I understand why. There is real reason to be worried about that. I also want to say so local governments have to be very mindful about what they're doing, and about communicating with people, and about putting affordable housing in to their plans, and social housing. And that's what's going to save us, not building bike lanes. But I also want to say about the just transition that Doug was talking about. Let's remember that the United States automobile industry was in part a reaction, that the boom in the industry post-World War II was in part a reaction from having a bunch of factories that had been turning out war materials that suddenly needed to build something else. And it was going to be cars. It could have been trains. It could have been anything, right? But they needed to repurpose those factories. Those factories have not been making only cars. You know, factories can make other things besides cars. They can make trains. They can make e-bikes. They can make solar panels. They can make all these things. It's the same thing that you're talking about, transitioning away from fossil fuels. Well, fossil fuel industry employs a lot of people. A lot of people make money off of that. Does that mean that we should just suck every last drop of oil out of the ground and never stop until it's gone? I think that probably most people here can see that we need to make a just transition away from the fossil fuel industry as well. And so I want to thank you so much for your questions and for pushing on this, because all of these three things that you raised are of absolutely vital importance, and we have to have good answers for them. And we have to have answers that are culturally specific and that are based in real research that I haven't done that level of research in your communities, but I have done it in some communities here, and I think there are really substantive answers. But again, we need to elect officials who see people who want to live human scale lives as constituents. Oh, the other thing I want to talk about, the just transition. Here in the United States, something like 51% of business investment right now is in artificial intelligence. This happened in 3 years, okay? And we're talking about taking many, many buildings that were built for something else and repurposing them for data centers. So I believe that we can move quickly when we want to, and I've seen it. And I've seen how we take money and infrastructure and repurpose it when there's somebody powerful who has some plans to make more money off of it. So what we need are elected officials who are prioritizing the lives of people and not the imperative of capital. And I think that's part of where the solutions are going to come from.
Next on the line, I have Fedi Kantawi. Please go ahead, and please let's keep our questions short. Or if Azbah and Reena would like to interact with Osama's question on this.
Yeah, I wanted to.
And Reena, is that also your case?
Yes, but
Right.
just it's very short.
I'll ask your permission to speak later because this is in the same vein
Sure.
to interact with Osama. Thank you so much, ladies. Azbah, you have the floor, and then Reena.
Okay, so yes, I wanted to talk about it because I have been through this kind of questioning. Like, I've reflected upon these questions myself because in my country, I've seen that happening. We are struggling financially as well. Like, I'm from Lahore. I am in the city of Lahore. I lived in the city of Lahore, and it's part of Pakistan. And like, we don't see the infrastructure here. We don't see like most of people can actually afford the safe bikes to travel across the places. Okay, so what made me believe that we need a shift here is I asked myself that what is my priority for my people? Is it health? Is it their lifestyle, which is more healthy and more safe? And then how it can be possible? It's like questioning that, not because we don't have a safe infrastructure, safe bicycling places, or safety for women, especially the gender violence is very much here, but are we going to maintain it? Like, I remember it was my discussion with my juror, and he questioned me that his clear statement was, things doesn't happen this way here. Like, I wanted to make a public space more livable, and he was asking me to make a building which is more marketable, you know. And I was like, no, like, he was like, this is not how things work here. How are you going to pass your degree with this kind of work? And I was like, things haven't worked like this before, but are we going to keep doing things the way it has been happening here? I don't want that. I want a different scenario for myself, a healthy places for my people, for myself. And we don't need money to live a healthy life. a great amount of money to live a healthy life. Also, I asked myself that how many people are actually dependent or are actually living well because of automobile industry or the industries that are working and making money, and how many people are living under the below, low income line or under the middle income line. And for my Pakistan, there are more people who are living the below line. It's most of the people is poverty line. The statistics. Okay, I'm not very good with statistics, but I know for sure that the poverty line is more. And people who walk to places, to their work, to their schools, to their different areas are walking, or either they're sharing bicycles. They are even renting out bicycles from each other, or like borrowing bicycles from each other. So do we want to prioritize them, or do we want to prioritize those who are actually capable of doing something else if the industry shift happens? So this was the question that I asked myself, and it took me a long time to come to conclusion with things. So I think, Osama, sorry, I'm taking the name wrong way, because this name in my country is named as Osama. So I would ask you that, are you asking these questions to yourself as well, that who are you willing to advocate for more? And then the answers will come to you in your own way, in the local context way. Like I said before, that the key takeaway for me from this book was that we need to make more car plans and car reduction plans, not the car free plans, because I know that this is not going to work for a great long period, because we have done so much destruction over the years because of political propaganda, politicians, their personal agendas. So yes, and when we study the local context, when we talk to our people, when we observe our people, we will be able to come to conclusions that will work for us, for sure. And when you advocate for the right reasons, you will get the answers, and you will get the work keep going, and also the right people for you. So yeah.
Reena, please.
Yes, let me just lower the hand. Yes, it's just I just had to react to Osema's point about, the car not being a symbol of oppression, but a symbol of freedom, and also like women who are harassed in public transport. Believe me, I know this. I'm from Delhi, but I have to say that if we start looking at the car as a solution to women's harassment, it is such a dangerous path, because it might be a liberty for one woman, or like a few, maybe 10% of women in the country. But what about all the other women in the country who don't have access to a car? If the car is the only safe option, then that means that we are privatizing safety, and we're privatizing freedom. And that doesn't seem to me like a good solution. I don't know the statistics in Tunisia, but I can bet that there is no more than 25. I mean, I can bet that it cannot be more than 25% car ownership in a country, in Tunisia. And probably that's like really high. It's probably much lower than that. And you can imagine out of that how many women own cars. So that would be like much less. And so it just doesn't make sense to not think of our streets and public spaces as the answer to where the safety has to come, and where we need to look for dignity for women, and women also as caregivers for children, so, and for families. So it is absolutely, I would say, like, I wouldn't even mince any words in saying that. I wouldn't even say that it can be. It really isn't. It really isn't the path to freedom. Unless we are talking about the freedom of like 10% of the population.
Yeah, I also, on the gentrification front, I also might say, it's sometimes a standard we don't apply to other public goods. If there, and many of you have, knowledge of places like this, neighborhoods that didn't have clean drinking water, and people were dying from cholera or other preventable diseases, and someone could come in and overnight change the sewer system and provide clean drinking water to residents. if someone stood up and said, yes, but won't that make rents higher in the neighborhood? You might give that some moment of like, you might entertain that for a moment, but at the end of the day, you would say, yes, but we need to fix the drinking water. I think sometimes when we talk about gentrification, yes, we have to be sensitive about it, but we also have to be careful that we don't fall into a trap, which I've seen here, where people want to keep their neighborhoods dangerous so long as it means rents won't go up. But what we're talking about then is children dying and seniors dying as they're crossing the street and everyone in between. So yes, we have to be sensitive to these things. We should never go into neighborhoods and just assume we know what's best and can just change everything. But we really have to, I think this speaks to Azbah's point of like, we must understand the stakes. And the stakes are people's lives generally. And everything should then flow from there. And if we have this sort of miracle solution, which is what I think walkability is, bikeability is, transit-focused development, things like that, we should not waste any time in deploying that, especially with climate as the looming and much larger issue.
Thank you so much for interacting with this issue. It's relevant. I relate to this, but I'll give the floor to Fedi first, and then I'll say my piece. Go ahead, Fedi.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. Like the book is really interesting. I like it raises interesting points when it comes to diagnosing the problem of cars, like the heavy traffic, violent death, environmental destruction, and so on. However, it does not really give us a look on how life would look like without cars. It talks about the problems, but it does not really picture for us anything that has to do with lives after that or the alternatives. Yeah, it's good to have bike lanes, but it's not really an alternative. And also, even in the United States, if you look at it, like in the United States, we have poor infrastructure without cars. Also, the layout of the suburbs, it's meant and it was done to have cars in it. Also, the placement of hospitals and schools, you cannot really commute without cars. And moreover, we have also like 60 millions of Americans living in rural areas. So they need cars to even do the basic things like buy groceries, pick up like their kids from schools, etc. And I think that this book is good when it comes to diagnosing the problem. However, in imagining life, how it would be like without cars, it does not really tackle that, or it tackles that from a little bit of a not in depth. See, thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
part of what we're trying to do with the book, number one, is to just get people to see the problem, which is, I think, as most people I think on this call understand, is almost sometimes it feels like 99% of the job is just getting people to see that this system that we're all living in and participating in is bad and needs to change somehow. And if you can just get people over that, then they're a little more open to a lot of the other solutions. I think, we do go to Ghent. We talk about Paris and explain, the changes that have happened in those places through, in some cases, low intervention methods, and how much better it has been. We follow the bike bus and we talk with parents who are using cargo bikes as a solution for living in the city, living in the suburbs to get their children to and from school, or letting their kids bike on their own power. So that is a sort of life after cars that doesn't require a radical reimagining of cities or any sort of like crazy expensive infrastructure. I think there's always room for another book with more in-depth solutions and examples from around the world of how public transit and all these other things could factor in to a life after cars. But I think woven into the book are lots of examples of people and places and ideas that are making this idea of life after cars possible. Whatever solutions might work, we didn't want to be too prescriptive either, because we want, the things that are going to work in New York City are not going to work in suburban Atlanta. And I think, Sarah could probably speak a little bit to the rural stuff, but it's been brought up on this call, I think, by Reena, that it's not about life with no cars. It is about life with cars in their proper place. And if you live in a rural area, sure, you're probably going to need a car for most of your trips. However, a lot of rural areas had very vibrant small downtowns with a pharmacy and a and a hardware store and a grocery store where you could park once and get everything done. Now, a lot of those same places have been hollowed out because of Walmarts and big box stores built off of a highway interchange where you have to drive, and even at the Walmart, you might not find everything that you need. So there are solutions even in rural areas to, if not eliminate or completely reduce the number of car trips people are taking, at least to give people options here and there. And it's not an absolutist argument that we're making, as I think a lot of people on this call really pointed out, which I appreciated.
Yeah, I want to speak directly to the rural experience because I was lucky enough to live for several years in the state of Maine, which is a mostly rural state with very long distances involved. That was actually part of what radicalized me because it was the first time in my life that I had realized what the true costs of car dependence were. I was very poor at the time. I had trouble putting gas in the car. I had trouble reaching work because I couldn't afford to put gas in the car. That was a real thing that I lived, and so I'm very sympathetic to people who live in rural areas and who can't do anything if they don't have a car that works, plenty of money for gas, and the good health that it requires to drive a car. Many people, so I just was back in Maine last week. I did an appearance in a rural part of Maine, and so this was top of mind for me. And what everybody there was saying was Maine is also an aging state. There are a lot of people who age out of driving, and then there are no options for them. And they become very isolated, and it really shortens their lifespans. And not only can they not access healthcare, but they have very little social interaction. And of course, that can really reduce your lifespan. So I was talking with a lot of rural transportation advocates last week about these very questions. And what was so interesting was some of the innovative things that they've come up with, including ride sharing, sort of almost like a mutual aid model for ride sharing in these small rural communities where there would be a person or people who are sort of they're like the local, I can drive you to your hospital appointment, I can do this, and that there's potentially funding sources that would help. Medicaid, for instance, in the United States, really are Medicare, excuse me, for older people is really our only national healthcare program. Does provide money for these rural transportation solutions sometimes. So there are people in rural America who are very, very invested in trying to empower the 30% of people in the United States who don't have driver's licenses, helping them to access what they need without cars. And I think there's a lot of really innovative thinking that can happen about this. And as far as, the book not detailing everything about what life after cars would look like. I mean, part of this is an imagination. It's a call to imagine. And it is a provocation, as I think Reena said. It is a provocation, and it is designed to raise these questions. So it has raised this particular set of questions, and I think they need to be very robustly pressed on. And it's not that we have all the answers, but we need to be asking the questions. And as Doug says, sometimes just getting people to acknowledge or to wrap their minds around the idea that this even can be questioned is so interesting. And I just want to add that one of the reasons that we chose the title Life After Cars, or that it resonated so strongly with us when it was suggested actually by a member of our publishers team. It was not us that came up with that. It was them saying like, we want a title that is approachable for people. And what I love about it is there's nobody on this call, there's nobody on the planet Earth who remembers life before cars. It's not that long ago, and yet it has passed out of living memory. And so it is a challenge to imagine what life with fewer cars, with life using cars for their best uses, their necessary uses. What would that look like? So yes, it's a provocation, and in many ways we don't have the answer because we can't. And so let's ask the questions, and thank you so much for that one.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And the last question the floor will be given to Dr. Hajar Ben Amr, and then we'll try to wrap up. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much, first of all, for this inspiring and thought-provoking discussion of the book. I've actually read a big chunk of it before coming here, and through the discussion that we've had so far, and through the many questions and comments and strong opinions that we've had so far, I have some comments of my own, and I think I understand that this book was more of a provocation and a way to get people thinking more than actual robust, as you said, solution for how to do it. But I would think that some of my comments could help in the future to look at a more concrete way to perceive this life after cars, if you might. First of all, I am very against the overgeneralization of the term global south, because this was said over and over and over. It's something in me could not really not say something about it. The global south is used as a very orientalist way to look at. Another word for the global south is the underdeveloped country or third world countries, or so this perspective is highly westernized and centralized in that way, and I don't think we can really provide solution from perspective of perceived simplified cultural perception. So I'm against that. So that's why I think it's very much needed that a life after cars should be something that comes out of the context of the different communities and the different countries that exist, and for them to decide how that life after cars, or even if life after cars is something to be imagined or something that would work for that community. And I would very briefly evoke Gramsci here and the idea of subalternity, and how that the subaltern need to have a say in how things or their solution for their liberty should look like, and should not be imposed from other community or other thought or other thinkers or intellectuals from other contexts. So I think this nuance should really be highlighted and emphasized. And I think one of the main points that makes this discussion highly contagious is the fact that the book so far lacks the nuance. Okay, that it's not really that dramatized and that doom factor that the cars are killing us. Yes, but many other things are as well. And the solution should be taken into consideration the context that we are in. As for the issue of women, and that sometimes the liberty of having a car, I'm going to speak mainly from my context, that is Tunisia, and for women to have that liberty. Statistically speaking, in Tunisia, we have 25% of the population owning cars, and not taken into consideration seniors and children. So that's already not a big minority, because we share cars, a family which share a car in Tunisia, by the way. But to have that advantage sometimes for women to be more free to go at night, more free to go long distances alone, okay, is an advantage that we cannot really neglect or say, well, we should all be equal in misery, Okay. But however, I'm with you in the sense that we should look into a better way to make public transport more safe. Yes, of course. But for this moment in time, with the infrastructure that we have, with the solution that we have, with the culture and the misogyny and the ideological bound that we have in this country, in the world at large, cars are a source of liberty. Let's be clear about that. Are they also killing us to a certain degree? 100%. But I see this is the nuance that I think the book really lacks in the way it puts forth the idea of a life after cars. And finally, I would like to also add on what Osama earlier said about the can we really economically afford the shift from the automobile industry into more railroad and more public transportation. And you said, yes, we can shift from the industry, the privatized industry of cars into more public transportation. But the shift really, in reality, cannot really happen because we're talking from a private industry to a public industry. And you are here also thinking about many of the solutions that you put forth are solutions that would also imply a shift in policy, a more of a socialist approach to many aspects of society that sadly, in a capitalist society, it's not really something feasible in the present, but hopefully in the future, this could be something redeemable. I hope I made some comments that can be further thought-provoking points. Thank you very much. I really love this discussion.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
first of all,
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, well, I want to acknowledge your point about the term global South. I think,
Yeah.
you're 100% correct. And that's something that we, as Americans especially, need to be really take into consideration and change our
And I
language.
was the one who used it first. So please, I have to say that that is something that in my 25 years as a journalist has been a really difficult thing because it has changed again and again. What people are saying is the thing that they, and I used an outdated term, and immediately as soon as I said it, I was like, oh shoot, I shouldn't have used that. And so I really thank you for that particular correction. And I see this in the chat, the idea of the global majority, or the majority world. I think that's really powerful, and I'm gonna start using that. And I would welcome anybody else's thoughts about that in the chat, because we are stranded here in North America sometimes. And really trying to find ways of talking that are useful and not Orientalist. And it's really,
we both take that kind of criticism
we're
very
so
seriously and
totalized.
personally.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you for
we
that.
always
I
try
really
to do that.
appreciate
So
that.
I guess I'm going to very respectfully push back on a couple of things. So number one, this is a book written by two North Americans, two citizens of the United States, residents of New York, who have lived elsewhere in this country, published by a North American publisher. So yes, I think another book could and should focus on other parts of the world and more contextual solutions for people in that global majority, or other terms that we might use. But I think it would have been very disingenuous for us to write that from our perspective as two white Americans who have not traveled or spent much time in much of the rest of the world outside of these places, especially as the book was meant to be more of an introductory idea for a lot of people who have not necessarily thought of these issues the way that we all have. Although, as I said earlier, we're trying to make it speak to everybody. Number two, I put in the comments about this idea of a just transition. Yes, automobiles are made by private companies and they are purchased by private individuals. But the trains that are run on our railways and in our cities as subways are built by private companies, by unionized labor, usually. And so when we talk about a just transition, like, capitalism still has a role to play in this. And it's not going to be like the government seizing the means of transportation production. It's going to be private companies in partnership with public governments that could make that transition possible. And I think also it's like, you know, we said earlier, these are a woman who wants to buy a car or use a car or borrow a friend's car or get a ride from a friend because it's safer for her. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, food capitalism, I know. But like part of the transition will be dealing with that. But you know, we are not trying to shame people for their individual choices. But if your society, and America has this problem, not just with race, with misogyny, but with racism and everything, has these problems at scale, they can't be solved with cars at scale. You know, if all of the women in the United States who feel unsafe taking public transit choose to take a car instead, we have a big problem on our hands. Like New York City would shut down with all of the traffic that that would create. These are societal problems. They need societal solutions. And we are not, to be very clear, shaming anyone for the choice that they have to make right now as they walk out their door tonight or tomorrow morning to make the decision that is best for them, their family, their friends, their neighbors. It is a long-term goal. It took 100 years in the United States to get to the system we have now. It is not going to be undone overnight. But we want people to really start thinking about systemic solutions to systemic problems. Right now, especially in the United States, whether it's gun violence or traffic violence, we are solely focused on individual solutions to systemic problems. And that's the narrative that we're trying to flip. And I would also just add that climate change is a huge issue, and it doesn't care about individual choices. And so we have to start making institutional, societal-wide solutions and decisions that are going to lead us to a fossil-free future. And cars are fossil fuel infrastructure. And we have to dismantle it however possible. It might take forever, but we have to keep trying.
And I do hope if you make it to the end of the book, that you'll see that we do talk about ways to build momentum for change at the local level. And again, I think those are things that we didn't get into a line by line prescription of how to do that, because it is going to look different in different cultures and different places for different people. So I hope that some of what is in the book is useful to you. I thank you for that critique, though. It's really been, I just want to say thank you to John and Yosra and everybody who is
All the
organized, and all the panelists, the people who read so beautifully and carefully, and the people who challenged us, and the people who push back and give us a different perspective. And believe me, I would love nothing more than to spend the next 2 years traveling the world to all the different kinds of places there are and learning from the people there what is right for those places. That would be my greatest dream. And the second greatest dream is that all of you out there are doing this amazing work. I mean, that's really the dream. So thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, such a privilege.
Thank you, Sarah and Doug. And I'd like to thank everyone who participated today through the discussion or by presenting comments. I can't forget the comments made by Professor Sadok Damak, who said, I managed to reduce the time and the way I use my car over the last decade. And then I also remember Azbah saying, overnight shift is not possible. And then I would like you to genuinely understand our frustration. And, you know, when I said North Africa, I know what I'm talking about. This is North Africa. We have a very specific context, different from the rest of Africa, different from the rest of the Arab world, or any South, that is, if we're talking about a South. And please do not feel bad about making these claims, because I want to draw your attention to the fact that everybody's dream in Tunisia, especially when you're young and you start your work and get paid, you dream to get a car. That's your first dream. This is the dream for youth here. And it will take us years and maybe centuries to get to a point where that's no longer the dream, because we will not be able to change the status quo, at least in our lifespan, because of corruption, because of bad state policies, because of instability, because of a lot of irregular immigration problems in the country and other priorities. So youth today would like also to live their lives. I mean, they won't spend their lifespan dreaming of something that is not probably going to happen while they're alive. But I love Reena's insistence on imagine if it works in your country. And your book pushed me to look for initiatives that were taking place in Tunisia. And I actually found initiatives, tactical urbanism, people who are urbanists and architects in Tunisia making initiatives to transform the capital, at least the city of Tunis, or the Grand Tunis that is made of 5 governorates, into a greener area. This is a process called renaturation. I shared the link in the chat box to a reference to a book that was written by an urban architect from Tunisia who made this research about how to make Tunisia or Tunis, the capital, greener. So it's possible. It's something we can dream of. It's something that is currently not possible, but your book pushes us to think of possibilities. And it's a book of hope, as Professor Sadok said earlier. So on this positive note, on the hope note, we'll probably be thinking of supporting green initiatives and transforming our cities into walkable cities for safer. And we all insult drivers when we drive or when we walk the street, but eventually we love our cars at the end of the day in Tunisia because you can't do otherwise. You don't have access to art, you don't have access to culture, I don't have access to my parents if I don't have a car. So you see, it's sometimes crippling and you can't do without in this particular period of our life in this country in particular. So I'll hand it over to John with all my love and thanks, and I'll leave today with a very positive note that tomorrow could be better for us too.
Thanks, Yosra. Just a couple of very, very quick for me so we can wrap this up. One thing I knew was going to happen is that the 2 hours would go quickly, and here we are. Or we never go over time in these sessions, but this time we have because there's just so much to say. So I just want to say one thought that just occurs to me is that so many times this general conversation about car culture and so on, in the UK maybe in particular, the conversation often steers towards, right, this is a problem. We need more police to enforce the rules so it won't be so dangerous. And I just love the absence of any, we just didn't get derailed by that here. And I really appreciate that. And I just also, I mean, there's so much to say and so many thoughts I'll have, be left with and continuing to think about here. But, this is sort of like car culture and the legacies of colonialism in certain ways that we're thinking and talking about here too. And there's just a lot to think about in terms of that as well. But basically, I mean, all there really is for me to say is thank you. Thank you, Azbah. Thank you, Sadok. Thank you, Reena. Thank you, Gabriela. And thank you, Doug and Sarah. And of course, my fantastic co-host, Yosra. Thanks everybody for the questions. And next time in September, a different, but actually, what's interesting, at the beginning of this conversation, maybe this seemed like a totally different book, Cold War on 5 Continents, A Global History of Empire and Espionage. But now, given the ways this conversation has gone, I'm seeing some more thematic links. Have a wonderful
I bet
day,
there's
everyone.
connections.
Yeah,
I bet
exactly.
there's cars in there somewhere.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, everyone. Mwah.
Thank you.
Beautiful stuff.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.